Solutions. We are a small nonprofit here in the heart of the Commonwealth with a big mission, and that is a mission of building a culture of peace. And our programs in the past and present really have focused on education. We've run peer mediation programs in local schools, trainings for educators, and we do general public events like this one to make everyone aware of the resources of nonviolence. Our focus is always on applied nonviolence, active nonviolence. So we welcome you heartily. We're so glad to see everybody is here who's come. Before we begin, we're going to do a few housekeeping details. This is a Zoom webinar. So if it's your first time, probably isn't. We just invite you to do what some of you are already doing. Put your name in the chat box. Let us know where you're from. We really wish we could see your faces, but identifying yourselves in the chat box is the next best thing in this time of COVID. Our format for the evening will be with a traditional lecture. We'll have a presentation from our guest speaker, Mel, followed by Q&A. And then after that, there will be an opportunity for those who wish to stay on the phone call to have some conversation about nonviolent protection efforts that are going on around the country. There are just a number of trainings of which Mel will reference in his talk. Please, if you could put your questions, as Mel is speaking, if you hear something that really grabs you and you want to ask questions about it, you can just put it in the Q&A. And if you want to take a moment to locate that icon at the bottom of your screen, it really says Q&A, and you can type your questions there. And we're going to try to address, as many as we can in the time allotted to us. So we want this to be a good and practical evening for all of you. An event like this is not possible without acknowledging the efforts and the work of others. So I want to do that right now. First and foremost, we want to thank Mel Duncan, who's given an enormous gift to us by sharing his time in the midst of an incredibly busy season right now for peacemakers. So we thank you, Mel. And also want to give a big shout out to Rochelle Perrette, our invaluable administrative assistant here at the center. We just couldn't exist without her. And also Sean Menahan, the chair of the board of directors at the Center for Nonviolent Solutions. They are doing tech backup. So much thanks to both of them. This is the annual Michael True Memorial Lecture. Every year we have done a Way of Nonviolence presentation program in which we've tried to spotlight the work of people or individuals that are applying nonviolence to domestic conflicts or international conflicts. And this was such an important work for Michael, because he really wanted people to know about the vitality and the application of nonviolence. So this lecture is in honor of him. I know many of you gathered are his friends and family, and there's a specific connection with tonight's speaker. For me, because the first time I met Mel was in the living room of Westland Street when Nonviolent Peace Force, which is what we're going to hear about tonight, was just a seed. But Michael was very excited about it. It's like, oh, you must meet and hear about this. So I found with some scrambling and assistance from our former ED, Krista Drew and Kyle Bissell, a short clip of Michael. So I'd like to just share that to kind of get us in the spirit of the evening. And then I'm going to give an introduction and we'll pass it off to Mel. So I hope bear with me, everyone, but we're gonna pull up a little snippet of our beloved Michael True and also beloved Paul Ropp, who both of whom passed within 2 weeks. They happen to be in this not documentary, but 17-minute film about the center's work.
Nonviolence succeeded in bringing down horrible authoritarian governments, dictatorships. People say, oh, well, nonviolence would never work. Well, it did.
Even long-standing conflicts that have built up resentments for decades can be resolved when people find the determination to find common ground.
That's what nonviolence is. It's people power.
But we have the power because we are the people.
So nonviolence is people power, and you can hear the energy in Michael and Paul's voice, and it's that energy that's bringing us into this evening tonight. The topic for tonight is rethinking security. Security is a basic human need. It is essential for our capacity to thrive as human beings. Without it, children don't flourish, communities and societies do not function well. And all of us know this, and this is why individuals and nation states invest an enormous amount into their security systems. But while security is a basic human need, it's also used to justify a terrific amount of violence and destruction. And it is also used to tolerate oppression, because many communities will accept the abuse of others if their reality, their world, their way of being is not disturbed, if they feel secure. So as people interested in nonviolence and really using nonviolence in our day-to-day dilemmas, the question is there another form of security than the type that we have been raised to use, which is primarily a security that is exclusive, my security or yours, and security that often relies on tools that are very destructive and paradoxically don't leave us more secure, but less secure. I can't think of any better person to help us think about alternative approaches than our guest speaker tonight, Mal Duncan. He is the co-founder and current director of advocacy and outreach for Nonviolent Peace Force, a world leader in unarmed civilian protection. NP, Nonviolent Peace Force, provides direct protection to civilians caught in violent conflict and works with local groups on violence deterrence in a variety of conflict areas around the world. So Mel is one of those people that's putting nonviolence in the tough situations. Mel represents NP at the United Nations, where the group has been granted consultative status. 2 recent UN global reviews cited and recommended unarmed civilian protection. The Presbyterian Peace Fellowship honored Mel with their 2010 Peace Seeker Award. The Fellowship of Reconciliation awarded him their 2007 Pfeiffer International Peace Prize on behalf of Nonviolent Peace Force's courageous efforts in conflict regions around the world. The Utne Reader named him as one of the 50 visionaries who are changing our world. The American Friends Service Committee nominated Nonviolent Peace Force for the 2016 Nobel Peace Prize. Mel is a graduate of Macalester College, St. Paul, Minnesota. In 2006, he was their Distinguished Citizen Award. He holds a master's degree from the University of Creation Spirituality. He splits his time between St. Paul and New York City. And this, my friends, is the most important detail about his credibility as a nonviolent peacemaker. He and his wife, Georgia, have 8 children and 12 grandchildren. If that doesn't teach you nonviolence, nothing will. So we would like to open with a short presentation, and then we'll turn it over to Mel.
at the beginning of the 20th century, the majority of fatalities in conflict were soldiers. And well, we fast forward 100 years and the majority of fatalities are actually civilians. And so the way we approach peacekeeping and civilian protection has to shift. In a place like South Sudan, where since December of 2013, a very serious civil war has displaced millions of people and tens of thousands of people have been killed. When women are moving out to collect firewood or to collect water or other things that they need, they're often targeted for sexual violence as a way to use rape as a weapon of war. In most cases, we see no incidents of violence as long as they're with a protective accompaniment team.
It was quite a surprise. People with weapons coming in saying like, you guys go, you guys go. And we said like, we're not leaving. They would hit the women and children. If we had a gun in those instances, we were like, like an armed peacekeeper, we probably would have been killed.
Hello, everyone. As I listened to the no sound video, I was reminded of ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in. I hope tonight that we can find some cracks and shine some light. I'm especially touched that I get to speak at a tribute to Michael True. And I noticed that Mary Laurel and Pat are here. When Nonviolent Peace Force was merely an idea in a few people's heads, Michael not only supported it, Claire, but he chaired a committee with the American Peace Research Association to give us, I think it was the second grant that we received. And so it was that belief in visions, belief in a shore more distant than here, that always kept me coming back and talking with Michael. So tonight we're going to explore the idea of how we might rethink security. And so Rochelle, if we could start with the slides. You know, I've worked in some of the most violent conflicts in the world, and I can honestly say that I get more nervous before a talk as to whether the technology is going to work, more nervous than I ever am when I'm in a conflict zone. So we really are at a place where we can stay in fear or live in hope. There will be a new story. Rochelle? It is being written right now. It will be up to us to be creative, to organize, to hold on to that vision and to do what's necessary to make it happen if we're going to be a part of telling what that new story is. Okay? So rethinking security is based upon shared values. And I left the left side of the slide blank because that's really something for you living in communities to define for yourself in a very inclusive way. With Nonviolent Peace Force, our ability to protect our security depends upon relationships, nonviolence, and being able to communicate with all parties to the conflict. So those are some of the values that we have, that we've been able to work with over the last 17 years that we've been fielding teams. Please. So I want to be very clear, though, that rethinking security is more than police without guns. Removing weapons from the equation is only part of the story. That's more of a negative piece. And what we're talking about is true security that is a positive piece, where the attitudes and institutions and structures are there to sustain human beings and peaceful solutions. So it goes way back. It not just as how do we tinker with police reform and some police not carrying guns. Next. Rethinking security is resistance plus constructive program. Those of us who organize nonviolently sometimes forget about building the constructive program along with it. So here, I've been back working in Minneapolis since June. And you may recall that our city council at one point, 9 of the 12 said that they were for defunding the police. But in the subsequent months, that has gone in many different directions because people did not have a firm vision on what they wanted. They knew what they didn't want, but not what they wanted. So as Barbara Deming always talked about, one hand up in resistance and one hand out in friendship and connection. Next, please. So a little bit about what we look like in the field. Our values are nonviolence, nonpartisanship, and the primacy of local actors. We are there to serve local people with whom we work with in working on our joint safety and security. Our teams are specifically trained. They work full-time, 24/7 on protection and violence prevention. They come from 40 different countries now. Almost half, unfortunately, we've dipped a couple points under the halfway point, but almost half of our unarmed civilian protectors in the field are women. And that's not to meet a quota. That's recognizing that there are certain things and understandings that women have that give them the ability to protect that many of us men cannot. Now, if you compare that to the UN peacekeepers, they're now at about 4% women, and their goal by next year is to be at 5%. Over half of our teams always come from the host country because we always have to build in sustainability from the very start. We're strategic. We always base our strategies and tactics upon clear conflict analysis and ongoing context analysis, working with local communities. We're nimble. We can move quickly. We don't have a lot of equipment. We live in the communities we serve, and we're cost effective. In this equation, we're the fiscal conservatives. Next, please. So I put this in. This was actually an ad that was on our website advertising a recent job opening that was in South Sudan. And if you take a look at it, you know, when I first read it, I thought, oh my goodness, who would remote setting, tented camps, no electricity or running water. Sometimes you have to walk 6 to 8 hours in a day. We never lack for recruits. That's one of the hopeful things. We typically will have 10 applicants coming from all over the world for every available position. Next. So just a quick look at how we're structured. Our roots have to be firm. We have to be firmly rooted in nonviolence and nonpartisanship, in the primacy of local actors. And then that allows us to do our work and sprout into a number of tactics that we use. And I'll share some of those tactics. It's been interesting here in Minneapolis. We've been sharing some of the tactics that we think might be applicable to urban situations in the United States and to Election Day next week. Please. So the first and most well-known of the methods that we use is protective accompaniment, where one or more of our civilian protectors will accompany individuals or groups who are particularly vulnerable. This is a scene from South Sudan, where we have a team now of about 180 people in 16 locations. Women had to leave the internally displaced camp, or what they called a protection of civilian area, every day to do errands, but more importantly, to collect firewood. As the areas got defoliated, they would have to go further and further, sometimes 15 kilometers into the bush. They would be routinely raped by either the government soldiers or by the rebels. Rape has been weaponized. It's to assert dominance, to seek revenge. What we found, though, if you see Tiago there in the front, one of our civilian protectors from Brazil, if 3 to 5 of our people go with 20 to 30 women, the soldiers leave them alone. This was 100% successful over a 4-year period. Next, please. Now, I'm sorry you didn't hear the movie, because you would have met Andreas and Derek. They were working in South Sudan in one of these protection of civilian areas when the berm was breached by a group of rebels who came in and started shooting people point blank in the head. Andreas, who's from Mexico, and Derek, who's from the United Kingdom, were with 14 women and children. They took them to a hut and stood in the doorway. And on 3 occasions, the rebels came to them and pointed their AK-47s at their heads and yelled profanities about, "Get out of here, we want those people." And on all 3 occasions, very calmly, Andreas and Derek held up their Nonviolent Peace Force identity card and said, "We're unarmed, we're here to protect civilians, and we will not leave." After the 3rd time, the young rebels left. Next, please. This is a scene where we find in northeastern Iraq, especially in camps where the widows and children of the ISIS fighters are being kept. They're despised by almost anyone. And so at night, they were being attacked, they were being raped, they were being injured. And we find that if we have 2 of our people walking the streets, walking the roads at night through the camp, the aggressors will stay away. Again, that has been 100% successful. Next, please. Humanitarian access. I could tell you stories all night, but I'd keep you up late. This was a situation where one of the rebel groups came to us in South Sudan and said that there were 2 villages deep in their territory and that humanitarians were afraid to go there and bring food and aid. And they thought that if we went first, we would open up the way. And as you can see, it was not an easy trip. I was on the third trip, and still I marveled at how the driver could even see a road. But when we got to the villages, we found people were malnourished, people without medical care. The second trip, the Norwegian Refugee Committee came with us. The third trip, UNICEF followed. And so the humanitarians were able to come in. Next, please. Early warning, early response. This is another quick story. This is in Mindanao, where one time the village where our people are sitting with the villagers was being approached on one side by a patrol of the armed forces of the Philippines, and on the other side, a patrol of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. People started to panic. They started to pack up. They started to flee. The elders called our team that was close by, and our team said that they would come. And en route, they called the local commander of the armed forces of the Philippines and the local commander of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and said, there must be a mistake. Your guys are with a half a kilometer of the village. You'll catch them in a crossfire. People are starting to panic and they'll flee. We know you don't want them to flee. And furthermore, we know that you know it's a violation of the ceasefire. But just to make sure everything works out okay, we'll come and stay in the village. By the time our team got there, both the patrols had backed off and 700 people stayed home. Next, please. So this can and is being done in the United States. This is the Meta Peace Team in Michigan, providing a protective presence for one of the Michigan Poor People's campaigns. And if I'm sure you're all aware that Michigan is not an easy place when it comes to the alt-right and the white supremacist groups. But Meta finds that they can provide protection through their presence. Next, please. Protective accompaniment. Again, we find that people who are disciplined, who know nonviolence and are willing to stay with it, are able to keep harm away, in this case, from people who are demonstrating in Cleveland. Next, please. This is from Minnesota. I know there's a few of you on tonight from Minnesota. In the late 1980s, the Ojibwe Mille Lacs Band of Native Americans had started exercising their treaty rights, which allowed them to spearfish walleyes. The white fishermen got very angry about this and became more and more aggressive. We found that if we placed ourselves between the white fishermen and the native people who were off to do their walleye spearing, that people stayed safe. And that, again, was totally successful. Next, please. In Baton Rouge, one woman being able, and she didn't plan to do this. She's a young nurse from New York City, had never been in a demonstration, but her clear, dignified presence can stop armed men. Next. And again, interpositioning. This is the Minnesota Peace Team in St. Paul, interpositioning when a group of riot police were about to converge on a group of demonstrators. Next. So what if a team like you just saw in the previous photo was organized and there at Kenosha? When the protesters went towards the gas station and then the white nationalists came in, if there could have been a group that interposed between them, perhaps several people would have lived. Next, please. Or what if there were trusted people in Minneapolis who could have done rumor control during the worst of the uprising? a lot of properties could have been spared and people unhurt and unarrested. Next. So one of the things that we've been doing in Minneapolis was that there was a campaign already underway that was being led by the students to get the Minneapolis police out of the public schools in Minneapolis. So and as you can see, the ACLU found that 1.7 million students are in schools with cops but no counselors. 10 million students are in schools with cops but no social workers. What does make us more secure? So these students continued to organize, and literally less than a week after George Floyd was murdered, the Minneapolis school board voted unanimously to not renew their contract with the Minneapolis police force. Next. Instead, they contracted with us to do the training for the replacements. So just the week before last, we spent 5 days doing intensive training on nonviolent ways of dealing with conflict, of organizing in advance, in involving everyone in terms of the shared responsibility, including students and teachers and staff, in their own protection. Now, we don't know how this will work because in Minneapolis, all the students are still on remote learning, but we'll have to see what happens here. Next. So I mentioned early warning, early response earlier. I could have gone on with the early warning indicators that we're seeing in this country of major violence, the extreme polarization, us versus them, the increase of hate speech, especially on social media, no social consensus on facts, people living with different realities, increased police brutality, increased domestic terrorism, unequal access, growing unequal access to basic goods and services, an increased number of guns. Right now, the gun stores in the Twin Cities cannot keep enough guns in stock. And then open violence starts to mix with politics, as we saw at Lafayette Square last summer, and as we're seeing in Michigan in the last few weeks. And finally, no commitment to a peaceful transfer of power. We could be on the brink of very severe violence. Next, please. So that's where we come in. We have a lot to do. And remember, we're building as well as resisting. It is highly unlikely that next Tuesday night there will be a definitive result. Now, there's scenarios out there that show that it could happen, but probably not. And so we need to urge calm and patience to all people as we wait the 1 week, the 2 weeks, the 3 weeks, whatever it takes for the results to come in. This will be a time that will be rampant with conspiracy theories, with rumors, and so for us to continue to urge patience. Also be ready to nonviolently resist a coup. There could be a coup attempt, and Choose Democracy, and Claire will provide you with their website, is providing training to people on what we can do to resist a coup. And their training now, their sessions are up to 1,000 people a night. And there's still several more that are happening between now and the 4th. Oh, there it is, Choose Democracy. Stop rumors. Rumors can kill. It's easy, but sometimes not. Be kind. Reach across lines. Reach across lines that you wouldn't normally expect. Find someone that you disagree with and create an improbable friendship. Speak out against every example of hate speech. and ban rapid fire weapons. Next, please. So this is the pledge where our democracy, you can go on that website and take the pledge to vote, to refuse to accept election results until the votes are counted, to non-violently take to the streets if a coup is attempted, and to shut down the country to protect the integrity of the democratic process if a coup continues. As you can see, this was from yesterday. Over 36,000 people have signed on to this pledge so far in our country. Next. And also reach out. We will need to make connections with people that we never imagined. And that's one of the beauties of nonviolence, because nonviolence always requires a broad base. It requires negotiating, working out differences with people we may not have a lot in common. But as Bernice Johnson Reagan said, she, the founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock, the coalition work is not done in your home. You have to venture out of the safety and the nurturing of the home. It has to be done in the streets. It's some of the most dangerous work you can do. And if you're going to do it, don't look for comfort. That's not what we're looking for. And so as we move forward and as we make the connections, we need to do so with creativity and compassion, with silence and science, and being willing to radically let go of notions that we have clung to our entire lives. Next. And as you're doing this, know that there are more peace builders, conflict transformers, mediators, nonviolent resistors, unarmed civilian protectors alive on this planet than ever before, and that number grows. That is not insignificant in the face of history. Next. We have everything that is needed to build a culture of peace that Claire mentioned. A culture of peace. Everything that is needed already exists in each of us. It will take a lot, but we have it. Thank you. Next. So I'd be happy to take questions, and my understanding is they're in the chat box. Claire, am I taking those?
Yes, you. I have some for you, Mel. But first, thank you so much. I just was trying to think of my own takeaways on this. How you've demonstrated in such a short slide presentation these two pieces of resistance or active being out on the street work, whether it's as doing accompaniment or interpositioning, and the constructive building, which is the efforts that are happening in the US context for you in Minneapolis with the school department and the police.
And Claire, can I just tell you something and share with everyone else? This morning, we have a team that's now here working in Minneapolis. And this morning, we were working with a group of 10 young men who were in a gang diversion program in North Minneapolis. And we've been doing nonviolence training with them. And they, on Tuesday, are going to go out and nonviolently protect 2 polls in their neighborhood. 2 polling sites that have been targeted. They, in fact, the Republican Party here has requested the Minneapolis Police Federation to encourage 30 to 40 off-duty policemen to come in and to police the elections. And so these young men will be there protecting their neighborhoods. And there's work like this happening all over the country right now.
So that's very heartening to know. And I have one question here from our audience was, does NP have a relationship with Christian Peacemaker Team? Their magazine is entitled Accompaniment, so the viewer wondered if they, was a connection. But I would add to that question, could you just explain a little bit more what accompaniment is and its evolution? Because it's a tactic that peacemakers have been really trying since the 80s and in Central America is where it first began. So.
Yes, in Nicaragua and Guatemala and El Salvador. And Christian peacemaker teams are doing wonderful work right now in Hebron, among other places. In terms of accompaniment, that you saw Tiago with a group of women who are going 15 kilometers into the bush to collect firewood. We're able to protect, not just because we're going for a walk. Most of our work is done before any chance of an incident. So in that case, we have people walk the route in advance. We notify all of the combatants. We wear blaze orange. We don't want to sneak up on anyone. We rely upon relationships that have been built before that day. And Christian peacemaker teams have been doing this now for a very long time. And they and Nonviolent Peace Force are part of at least now 50 organizations in the world that are doing some form of unarmed civilian protection in 24 different areas. And that number grows. And it's not growing because someone's out there organizing it. It's growing because people are responding to the conditions that we face.
So a couple more questions. One viewer wanted to know where in the US, what US cities is Nonviolent Peace Force working on? And we should, I neglected to mention that this is novel for NP to come to the US because you have until very recently, even though you originated amongst Americans, have worked internationally. Is that correct?
Yes, and we had a group of us who were both from the United States and a variety of other countries who really came together. I heard that David Hartso was going to be here, one of the other people credited with co-founding. But David and I weren't really the co-founders. What we were able to do was to hold the focus long enough for people who shared this vision to step up and to create Nonviolent Peace Force. We did have one other project in the United States. We worked at Standing Rock in 2016 and 2017, but this is our first large-scale effort coming back home to Minneapolis and seeing if what we learned in other parts of the world might be applicable here. We're also working with a variety of other groups. Just before I got on this Zoom call, we were doing a training with a group of people in Washington, D.C. in conjunction with the DC peace teams as they get ready for the elections and the aftermath of the elections. We're also working with a group in Chicago, a group in Fargo, and a variety of other places.
And another viewer wanted to know, how do people hear about your work, in the world? Like, how does the word get out about Nonviolent Peace Force?
You missed us on CBS or CNN? You didn't see the feature on Fox News about active nonviolence? You have to look for us because the mainstream media from left to right is not interested. They don't want to believe this. They have too much writing on violence and militarism. So we have to make our own news. We're on social media. Please go to our website and sign up, and we'll be happy to work with you. And we'll continue to grow. We'll grow and grow, and they can't ignore us.
You mentioned that women were a big part of your peace force and how that is in stark contrast to traditional, militarized peacekeeping. Can you just talk a little bit more about women and security? It's a very key field that needs to be elevated more. So if you could just talk briefly about the contribution and the necessity of women being present in security efforts, which is not what we're raised to understand. We think that it's the task of the males in our society.
We could not do the kind of work we're doing with just men. We need people, really men and women and people who don't identify on the binary scale. It takes all of us. And what we found is that in every violent conflict where we have worked, there are people doing creative and courageous peace building, human rights defense, and regardless of the country or the culture, that work is primarily being done by women. Women occupy space that isn't recognized, but is vital if communities are going to survive. Other women understand those spaces and understand the need to protect and build those spaces. More practically, we find that there is so much gender-based violence, so much rape, that women who have been attacked, assaulted, would much rather, almost always, go to another woman than go to an armed man or even an unarmed man. And so we really can't go together or go ahead if we don't go together.
So we have another question here from Linda Modica, Cataldo Modica. She noted that your comment about the sold out gun stores in the Twin Cities was very disturbing, to say the least. Do you know, Mel, if there are any peacekeepers working in Tennessee? We already have the KKK intimidating voters at early voting sites. So what about dealing with armed actors, which is unfortunately an aspect of this election season, or potentially? How are peacemakers thinking and responding to that reality?
There is a network called the Shanti Sena Network, which was Gandhi's term for peace army. And there are, as I said, groups of us that are around the country. I'm sorry to say there are none in Tennessee. But if you want to start organizing, we'll certainly give you the training and support to do that.
Yes, and I want to mention that DC Peace Team, and we'll try to put them in the chat box, is doing trainings, and they have, there are organizations that are trying to identify hotspots, looking at our major cities, and
yep.
They, in their training, provide active bystander intervention and nonviolent communication. When this detail came up in a 2-hour sort of shop talk among some very experienced nonviolent activists who had worked in Serbia and the Philippines, and in situations where armed actors were a very definite part of the equation, the American contributor noted that in our context, a lot of our armed actors, and I'm originally from Tennessee, so shout out to you there, Linda, they identify as Christian. So this is an important detail for engagement for us.
Yes.
To share that faith, to speak from that language, and even though it's very troublesome to see our fellow Americans, with guns. They are our people, so to speak. We're not trying to address armed actors from a cultural context different from our own. So really, it was advised to think about those points of connection.
And we are all our people. We live because everything else does. There's no them.
Another question, and that is coming from Michael Moran. He wanted to know if Nonviolent Peace Force has connections with the campaign Nonviolence with Pache Bene. I have a poster, because the center has been a collaborator on that front with campaign Nonviolence. So
Yes.
you might want to explain what that is.
Well, Pache Bene actually, again, did very early training for us. And an exercise that we were using a couple of hours ago, we figured out how to do these exercises on Zoom, which are a little clunky, but was an exercise that we learned from Pache Bene years ago. And they have been very supportive of us all along. And in terms of the campaign Nonviolence, there was 10 days of nonviolence that was called in September. And we supported that and spoke at that. And we are organizing now with the Service Employees Union, the Democratic Socialist Alliance, and Twin Cities Nonviolent, which is a part of this network for doing the protection at the polls. And so they're right in there. And we'll be fielding people in orange vests and orange face masks to the most vulnerable polling places in the Twin Cities.
And could you speak about one really important component of nonviolent work is to identify the different sectors in the community that you want to reach out to. You had mentioned that coalition building is so important. And NP is working with the service employees, SEIU. Could you talk a bit about what is happening on that front, even as a result of these connections over the election?
You know, I've frankly been surprised at how readily people have accepted nonviolent peacekeeping. In the case of the Service Employees Union, which at least in the Twin Cities is over 80% Black and brown, they have a lot of private security guards who are organized, are members of the union. So we're actually doing three things with them. We're doing the joint election work. We're doing training with their security guards and with other members, because like many places, good things don't happen when 911 is called. And so their memberships are learning things like de-escalation, so as to deal with issues before 911 is called. So they were a partner that stepped forward very, very quickly. There's also neighborhood groups. There are neighborhood groups that are already doing patrolling, nonviolent patrolling in their neighborhoods in Minneapolis. They were already doing it. So if we can give them a little support or some pointers about what we've learned. So there's a lot of points of interest. We also make it a point to communicate with the police in both Minneapolis and St. Paul, and to keep those lines of communication open. We're communicating with the school board and members of the city council. And so there's a vast array. But we're also working with the meditation centers who are fielding people to be at the polls. There are a lot of allies that we can reach out to. And more importantly, there are gaps that we can step over. And we're going to have to do that. with people that we may not have much in common. We may think that, but when we sit down and talk, we have a lot in common, because there will be a peace building phase. It will come more quickly. The more quickly that we can dissolve that false dichotomy of us and them.
That's my last question. We are framed right now as a people divided and polarized, and unprecedented polarization is what the media is continually telling us about who we Americans are now. And you noted that one of the 4 roots of nonviolent peace force is nonpartisanship. So what advice can you give to our recent habit, old habit of wanting to be partisan?
Paula Green, a neighbor of yours, has done some remarkable work of a community in Massachusetts connecting with a community in Eastern Kentucky. And they've had 3 interactions, and 2 times in Massachusetts and 1 time in Kentucky. Find someone that you disagree with. And I mean, we can't do it now. We can't invite them out for coffee, but invite them for Zoom coffee. And don't talk politics. Talk about your families. Talk about your community. You have a lot in common. We have everything in common. And again, we live because everything else does.
We have a question from Linda again on your reference to a coup and the potential for a coup. And could you talk a little bit more about what that thinking is, what that might look at? It's a kind of alarming term for us here in the US. So Linda asks, could you talk what you think that would look like?
Well, we have a president that has said he doesn't know whether he will give up power. He's been clear about that. He also has been able to get federal forces to work at his behest. The whole Operation Legend last summer, the armed forces that were sent to Portland were not part of the 4 branches of the armed forces. They weren't under the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's able to create factions of his own army, to have a Justice Department and now a Supreme Court that will work for him. And so it is plausible that he could get beat and refuse to accept the results and refuse to leave. And at that time, as I pointed out with the indicators, things could become violent. And that's why we have to be prepared to work nonviolently with thousands more. 38,000 people have signed that pledge, and there'll be more by Election Day. And if you remember, some of you are old enough to remember the Pledge of Resistance in the 1980s, and the thousands of people that stood up and stopped the military aid to the Contras. There are precedents. And as Michael True said, nonviolence works. If you haven't seen Maria Stephan and Erica Chenoweth's Civil Resistance, they looked at every civil uprising in the world from 1900 to 2006. And they found those that remained violent or remained nonviolent or primarily nonviolent were over twice as likely to achieve their goals than those that had been violent. And they were much more likely to support human rights and to spawn democratic institutions. So I hesitated, Claire, because I don't want to spin off theories that are the stuff of TV channels and entertainment every night. But we have to be clear that there is danger.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? We really are grateful for this very rich evening, Mel. And I hope for our viewers that it's given them a new sense of empowerment, that communities can indeed just help and contribute to the definition of their own safety and take responsibility for that. That is a key factor. Those of you who were with us in April, we did a webinar. This is our fall one, but we did one in April around the abolition of nuclear weapons. And I just want to give a very good news update, yes. Which is for, in case you missed it, because it wasn't headline news on the newspapers, but the 50th country ratified the UN Treaty for the Total Abolition of Nuclear Weapons. And I want to, which means that this treaty is now a legal document, that it is now international law. So it is an extraordinary achievement. The treaty was only finalized and up for ratification in July of 2017. So that's been achieved in 3 years. And more importantly, it was an initiative not of political officials, state leaders, but of people. As Michael said, a people power, a nonviolence is people power. And that movement to create the treaty was in response to people feeling that the treaties that the governments had drafted did not reflect a concern for human security. It reflected a concern for national security, or one could even argue corporate security. So we are really celebrating that and remembering it tonight, because initiatives that seem small and clunky can have results that we couldn't imagine. So we're really wanting to share that good news with you. And thank you to all who participated. If you wish to stay on, we have the program on for a little bit longer. We will take questions specific to nonviolent election protection if you have any. The center is trying to give out resources on that effort. There are a lot of groups working. So if you want information on that, what's happening, you're welcome to stay on for a little while. But we thank you so much, Mel, and really, especially since you were coming from another event.
Well, and thank you, Clara, and thanks, Rochelle, and thanks, Sean, for doing the background work to make this happen.
Right. So we got, let's see. Yes. So while we're here, how did the DC training go, Mel?
You know, I mean, we start again tomorrow. It's only half done. It was a little dull. And I don't know whether that was us or the people. It's hard to do these things on Zoom, yeah, because our trainings are so interactive.
Yeah.
And to figure out how to, go in the little rooms and, do the exercises, we're trying to be creative, but it's not the same.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's. I saw a really clever. I don't usually use the word cute training done by a peace education group in Chicago that works with young people. and the teacher had one of his students, and the student explained sort of 4 points, and then they actually did a role play on, on the practices. So you're getting a shout out from Maureen Flannery, and Kate and Sheehan and Peter were thanking you, longtime supporters of the center.
And Anne Frisch, who was one of the people who worked on that treaty, and has been one of the senior advisors and real backbones of Nonviolent Peace Force, reminds us that the treaty doesn't take effect until the 22nd of January.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you, Ian. Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, I'm having trouble keeping track of all the, for those asking about a recording, I forgot to mention there will be a recording of this. And we are staying on for just a few more minutes if anybody has questions regarding trainings for nonviolent election protection. People in the Massachusetts area, well, actually nationwide, one of the groups is Protect the Results. So it's just talking to folks there about that. So when the people that are doing poll monitoring in Minneapolis, they're going to have vests, the masks. What are they staying in shifts, or do they work in pairs? Do they?
We're I think we'll cover about 40 polling places.
Wow.
in 2 shifts.
Wow.
And yes, we're all wearing the orange vests that say Democracy Defenders, and our orange mask says Democracy Defenders, because we're more than monitors. We are trained to intervene. And so if there is someone who is harassing or causing violence, we certainly will intervene and use the methods that we've learned over the years.
So how does that work with regard to state authorities? Will they, I'm just curious, do they say you can't be here, or you can be here, or how does that piece work?
In Minnesota, it's you have to be 100 feet from the polling place, and we will usually be there. But if there is a group that pulls up and starts harassing people 50 feet from the polling place, then we're going to have to cross the line and go to that place. Now, if the officials want to make sure that they stay away, fine. But no one has any business in Minnesota questioning anyone in line. That is illegal. And so if people are breaking the law, we'll remind them.
And is that a serious concern that behavior could happen?
Yes. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune this morning ran an article that I referenced where the state Republican Party has asked the Police Federation in Minneapolis. This is the same federation that defended the 4 police officers who murdered George Floyd and were accomplices in the murder. And ask that 40 to 60 off-duty police go to targeted polls. That means polls in the Black neighborhoods to make sure that everything goes okay.
Wow. Wow.
So we'll get to meet them.
Yeah. That's going to be an important dynamic to think about. And it could be end up being very positive. Potentially, are the communities where you're going to be, have they expressed concern or fear that this disruption?
people from those communities are part of the teams.
Oh, okay. So that's great.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
How about the faith communities? Because we've tried, I put out some different feelers for our faith leaders here in the city. I think there's such an important, can be such an important presence. And I know there's lawyers and collars work, and there's a couple of other groups that are really specific to like clergy or faith leaders. But what's going on in Minneapolis?
The Lutherans are covering 3 poles, and we'll have a mobile unit. There's a interfaith group that a representative of the Rabbinical Association in Minnesota took our training on Sunday afternoon, and he'll be part of that mobile unit. And those are the ones that I know of that we're working with directly at this point.
Wow. So there's specific, they're taking specific polls.
Yeah. The Lutherans are. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah, it gives you a lot of hope about Americans. And I, I was struck when Rosemary said that people, let's see, there's one other question here. So I just want to see. Yes. Okay. Yep. We answered. People are wanting to know if this will be recorded. So it will, Mel, so you can share it on your circuits also. But just wondering about, I suddenly lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. We'll come back to it. Because I had reached out to, I think my sense of the faith leaders here is that they've organized very much around just getting people to vote. And so that's an enormous amount of important work. But I've appreciated the peace people saying we do have to think about this as a season, like not just the day of the voting, but how to help people get through that period of waiting for results without causing harm.
Yeah.
And then that's why I think the networks that are being built now, regardless of the, I hope they're sustained no matter who is in office, so that people can see, oh, we can take responsibility for our democracy. So I hope that continues afterward. We'll see.
Regardless of who wins, we're going to have a lot of work to do.
Yes. That's why I think it's so, the nonviolent communication training, the getting the interfaith networks to, if they're not vital, getting them vital, which some people are doing. I've sat in on trainings where I know the Episcopalians are trying to have a national resource list for all of their clergy. All right, well, I think we should probably close up because you've had a long day and you've got to do another training tomorrow. And we want to thank everybody who's joined us for this important evening. We really hope it was useful for you. And we will post this on Facebook and also on our website. So it will be available to view at your leisure. And
Thank you.
All right, Mel, thank you so much. Take care. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna leave.
I think it's still recording. Quite sure how to stop that.
Yes, I'm stopping the recording now.
Okay.